Alright guys, good afternoon. So today we are going to be talking about inverse functions, okay? And rest assured I'm not going to make you draw all your functions again or watch me draw all of your functions. But I want to give you an example of what an inverse function is. So we're going to go to Desmos today, okay? So on the graph right now, I have the line y equals x. Most basic line I could ever have. That line is going to act like our mirror, okay? And around that line, I'm going to graph y equals x cubed, so our cubic function, in green there, and our cube root function in purple. So here's the thing that I want you to think about. The green and the purple, the cube root and the cubic function, they are inverses of each other. Well, look at what happens then. When the purple goes up above the blue line, the green goes down below the blue line. When the green is above the blue line, the purple is below the blue line. It's like that blue line is a mirror, and the green and the purple are reflections of each other. That's what an inverse is. Remember how in our last lecture we talked about reflections and how that means we flip something upside down? Well, when we call something an inverse function, what it means is it's been reflected across the line y equals x. Okay, that's all it is. So with that in mind, now let's go back to our examples and talk about what that means. Okay? Sorry, my Wi-Fi is not the best. Come on, little tablet, you can do it. Now I have faith in you. There we go. Okay. So keeping in mind that inverses just means they've been reflected. When it says something like, find the inverse of y equals negative 2x plus 9, here's what's actually happening. If I have an inverse, x and y have literally just reversed. So the inverse function would be x equals negative 2y plus 9. So like inverse, we don't really use that word a lot, but we do use the word reverse. That's basically what they are. X and y have reversed places. The only thing that I have to do now is that even though, yes, what I have written on the screen is a correct answer, we usually want y by itself. So how do I get y by itself? Well, I start by subtracting 9 on both sides. So I get x minus 9 equals negative 2y. Now what do I do? Well, that negative 2 is being multiplied by y. So to get y by itself, I divide everything by negative 2. And watch how I write this. It's not really proper to leave a negative on the bottom of a fraction. So what ends up happening is I have a negative x plus 9 over positive 2. And there is my inverse function. Okay? Sometimes people will write it this way. But notice those are the same thing. Because the x is still negative, the 9 is still positive on top. Okay? So there's your inverse function. Let's say you're given a square root function and it says find the inverse. Well, again, find the inverse just means swap x and y. So x goes where y was, and y goes where x was. So in this case, if I've got a square root function, how am I going to get y by itself? Well, the first step is very similar. I start by adding 5 to both sides. On the right, it cancels. On the left, I'm just left with x plus 5. Okay? So y is still not by itself. Right now, y is inside of a square root. So how do I cancel out a square root? Well, by squaring it. So I get x plus 5 squared equals y plus 8. What's my very last step now? Well, I've got to subtract that 8. It's being added, so to cancel it out, I have to subtract it. And again, watch how I write this. X plus 5 squared minus 8. I'm not combining the 8 with the 5 because that 5 is inside parentheses. It's being squared. That right there is my inverse function. Okay? All right. What about if they give me a quadratic and say find the inverse? So something like y equals 3x squared plus 7. Well, again, same concept. You have x and y being reversed. So x goes where y was, and tell you what, let me pick a different color here. Let's get something darker. We'll get like a dark blue. So x and y have traded places. And then I have to get y by itself. So I start by subtracting the 7 to the other side. So x minus 7 equals 3y squared. Well, what do I do with the 3 now? Well, it's being multiplied. So the opposite of that is to divide it. So I have x minus 7 over 3 equals y squared. Well, y is still not by itself. Right now, y is being squared. So what's the opposite of that? Well, I square root it. And square roots and squares always cancel each other out. The only thing that you have to remember, and again, we'll talk about this more later in Algebra 2, but for now, what you need to know, whenever you square root something, you have to put plus or minus in front of it, and here is why. Think about with the number 4. 2 times 2 is 4, but negative 2 times negative 2 is also 4. So if I technically ask you what the square root of 4 is, there's technically 2 answers, 2 and negative 2. So whenever you have a square root like this, you have to put a plus minus out front because it could be positive or it could be negative. Okay? All right. Very last example, I believe. Find the inverse of a cubic. And we saw this example at the very beginning. You saw a cubic function. The inverse of a cubic is a cube root. Just like the inverse of a quadratic, which is where something is squared, is a square root. So what do I do first? I start by reversing x and y. And at that point, my sole job is to get y by itself. So I start by canceling out the 27. So I subtract it on both sides. Basically what I'm doing is I'm working outside in. I start with the number farthest away from y and move in. Well, now I've got to deal with that little cubed symbol. Well, just like if something is a square root cancels that out. A cube root cancels out a cube. So now I have the cube root of x minus 27 equals y minus 8. What's my last step here? Well, you've got a minus 8 with y. To cancel that out, I need to add 8. So your final answer, you have the cube root of x minus 27 plus 8. And again, I don't put the 27 and the 8 together because that 27's inside the cube root. It's like it's in a box and I can't touch it. But you're done right there. So just to recap, if you're asked for an inverse, you have 2 steps. Number 1 is reverse x and y. Number 2 is get y by itself. And we are done with this topic.